Welcome to the High Voltage Light Electric Vehicle channel. This video is an update on the DM02 motor from TOSEVEN. This is the smaller of the two new mid-drives the company is bringing to the conversion market. I tried this motor a few months back and ran into a firmware issue, so after that I switched to the larger DM01 and have been riding around with that while I waited to get cables to flash the firmware. I am calling this a sponsored video because I'm being sent these motors free of charge, and in return I'm providing valuable data and information on them and a part in our community where others can do the same. I am free to give my opinion, however, which I will do. It's exciting though, because potentially with the DM01 here we might now have that mid-drive conversion motor with a torque sensor that can be modified the way the BBS HD can. This is actually a brand new motor from the line that will be going out to customers. The first one is with Greg getting put through its paces on the dyno so we can determine the limits of this little beastie. We were hitting over 22,000 RPMs at 72 volts unloaded. Under load on the dyno it's been up to 15,000 RPMs at 2.5 kilowatts, again at 72 volts, which for such a small motor is pretty impressive. I have my doubts as to whether we will do an upgrade kit for the O2, but it's an interesting experiment and it will be interesting to see how it performs on the bike in the real world. Even if it only handles 1500 watts, that's still triple the 500 watt rating it's stamped with. I'll save people from posting in the comments. There is more interest definitely in seeing what we can do with the DM01, and it is the more likely candidate to run with the high voltage kit. There is a motor on its way to be tested with the ASI controllers, and it's in a truck somewhere between Canada and the USA. With all these things though, we just don't know until it's been run. There is a possibility that the ASI ecosystem will not get on with it. I have my fingers and toes crossed though, because having not only motors like this, but a company that's willing to listen to and engage with riders and the DIY community is what many of us have been waiting for a long time. Anyway, this video is about the DM02, so I have some ride footage of the motor and I will talk about my experiences with it. I'm riding here with the firmware settings pretty much exactly as they come from the factory, with a few minor tweaks which I'll talk about. The first is that I set the battery to 52 volts because that's the type of battery I'm using. While we're talking about batteries, the one I'm using with this build was generously donated by Golden Motor. It's a 52 volt 25 amp hours of Samsung 50E cells, which is plenty enough to power the TOSEVEN motor's stock. I'll post a link to that in the description. Also a shout out to Rogoff Bags who made my triangle bag. There's no way I'd be able to fit this into a standard triangle bag, but because this has a tear out section, I'm able to slot this battery in with lots of padding to protect it from vibrations. Links to Rogoff also in the description. Other changes to settings I made were to bump up the maximum speeds to 50 kph. I did notice that the way the controller handles the transition around the enforced speed limit was smooth and did not surge. So the route I'm on here is a good test for the motor because it's 35 kilometers in total and it's mostly uphill. There's about 1000 meters of elevation gain and it's pretty steady, so there's not a real chance for the motor to get much of a break. I wanted to figure out what the thermal limits of the motor were and to find out the ideal balance of sustainable power at a comfortable riding cadence. Out of the gate I stuck it on the max current allowed, which is 19 amps. The first hill is 8 to 10% grade, so it's a nice test. What I found was the motor steadily increased in temperature up to the 60C point. I had the test settings screen open so I could see this as I climbed. Bike speeds were about 25 to 30 kph depending on the severity of the hill. The motor was pushing north of 900 watts continuously over the course of 4 kilometers. It went from 25 to 60C. Once the motor reached over 60 degrees, the thermal protection kicked in, which dropped the power quite dramatically. This led to not the nicest feeling to ride, so I stopped and checked the settings. The stock behaviour was set to drop the power to 30%, which jumped back to full when the temperature fell below 60, leading to a sort of seesaw type effect. So what I did was to set the behaviour to drop to 70% power. I also dropped the power level to one set at 70%. This resulted in a continuous power output of 500 to 515 watts. For the rest of the ride, I then used the gearing of the bike to basically maintain the temperature of the motor at that point. By using the gears of the bike properly, the motor was able to dish out a near constant 500 watts and the temperature ranged between 58 and 63 degrees. When I got to the destination, I put my hand on the outer casing and was easily able to keep it there. It was nice and warm, but I would say it was at the upper limit of what would be tolerable in a hot tub for a short period. So I think there is some wiggle room here in terms of heat management, but it's good to see that the thermal monitoring and regulation is active and working. In terms of how the motor felt, I was quite pleased. A firm push with your foot on the pedal and it kicks you away from standstill very nicely. That's something that's very important where I live because of the hills that are in every direction. The ramp is possibly a bit aggressive, but that should be an easy tweak. I'm going to compare the feel of the torque sensor to the CYC Photon because I think right now that is the benchmark that I have for a torque sensor in a mid-drive conversion motor. In many ways the DM02 is more comparable to the Tongsheng TSDZ2, but at least right now I think the DM02 is going to sit between these two motors in terms of power output. I would say that in feel it's about 85 to 90% there when compared to the feel of the Photon motor. The current firmware is a vast improvement over the earlier version I've been using. It's much better at handling the torque input at lower levels of strain when you're cruising to a stop sign or changing gears, for example. That's pretty encouraging because to me that means there's room to make this better just by tweaking the setting. I'm informed that making the controller firmware open source is being worked on, which would be really good. They did this with the Tongsheng motor and the result was a really finely tuned firmware that was worked on in the DOA community, and I'd love to see a similar thing happen with these motors if possible. In terms of noise, I found the motor to be very quiet, however there was just enough noise at the right pitch that you can hear when the motor starts to labour a bit if the rider's cadence drops and it's forced to run at a lower RPM. After a while I got used to the pitch and could use it to help guide me with shifting gears on the bike. In terms of speeds, I range between 25 and 40 kph. This is very much a pedal assist motor. You can use the throttle with it, but it will not be my choice. You won't miss out not having one. All it will do is build up heat really fast. If you wanted to use it to nerdle the bike around on the flat, or if you wanted to get yourself home if you were hurt, then it's usable. But I would be careful to use the gears properly because otherwise I think you'll rapidly hit a point with heat when you get shut down to protect the unit from damage. I'm going to do a much more in-depth video with this motor and compare it more with the other options on the market like the CYC Photon. This is more to get a feel of where the limits are with it as it is stock out of the gate. At the end of the day, all that matters is that you have a motor that's fun to ride, and it definitely was that. I was able to ride out to the in-laws cabin in a respectable time in the beautiful fall weather and feel like I was riding a bike still. I got exercise value from it. I was not constantly messing with settings in order to keep the cadence comfortable. If you have questions and would like me to look at a particular aspect of this motor in a more detailed video, let me know in the comments. If it's not something I have the answer to, then I can likely get the information from TOSEVEN. As always, a huge thanks for watching the video and special thanks to the channel members who make all this possible. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.